Welcome back to What's in Your Kete. I'm Jane, and joining us this week is Alex Hawley, a proud aunt, a beadwork and textile artist, and citizen of the Navajo Nation. Alex was here in Aotearoa for 2 years on a Fulbright Fellowship. She immersed herself in the local art scene and connected deeply with Māori and Pacific artists. Her journey bridges Indigenous cultures, creativity and resilience, and a lot more. Alex, could you share a little bit more about yourself and where you're from? I'm looking forward to unpacking your story today.
Yate she'e Alex Yunishia, Kia ani nishla Bilagana Bashish Chin, Taba Hedashiche Bilagana Dashit Nali. Hello, Kia ora. My name is Alex. I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I'll be referring to myself as Dene, which is the term that we, identify as ourselves. And I am a woman of the Towering House clan, so I'm Kiani. That's my maternal grandmother's first clan. And then Tapahe, or Among the Water's Edge people, on my maternal grandfather's side. So I think that is what keeps me coming back to Aotearoa, is my sort of connection with water in that way. And then on my father's side, I am Bilagana, which is like an Anglo settler term, but he's sort of from the Scotch, Irish, German variety on that side. So yeah, that's who I come from. I recently completed my master's degree in Aotearoa at Waipapatal Maturau. And so it was really exciting to work with Nanino Ellis and Caroline Berko in the art history department at Auckland Uni. And yeah, and I completed my thesis, so we did it. And
Congratulations.
yeah,
Yay.
thank you. Yeah, it was very exciting. And I can speak more to just the thesis and just, being a Navajo in the island. I can speak more to that later. But yeah, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. Mhm.
Well, gosh, hasn't this year gone by really fast?
Mm.
I know we shared some food and time together early the year and caught up at an exhibition, a couple of exhibitions, I think,
Yeah.
early this year before you wrapped up your trip. And yeah, time's just gone by so fast, but regardless of the distance, I knew our connection would still be strong.
Mhm.
And so it was obvious for me to, yeah, let's have this podcast and hear about, yeah, I'd love to hear about your trip and your takeaways from being here in Aotearoa. Um, and maybe just starting with yourself as a textile artist. Can you give us a bit of a
Totally.
rundown on that?
Yeah. So my maternal family comes from the Northern Navajo Nation. So my mother grew up in Shiprock, New Mexico, and that's where my maternal grandmother is. So I'm here in Santa Fe now at the Indian Arts Research Center, and I'm about 3.5 hours away from my grandma in Shiprock. So it's nice. It's a lot closer than a 12-hour flight. And just with being a Diné Edzana or a Navajo woman, weaving is considered a woman's, like a matriarchal practice. I will say that we have a lot of phenomenal young men doing really beautiful textile work today. So that's not to say that it is strictly gendered in that way, but it is, to me, it's very much a matrilineal practice. And so my maternal family were, the Navajo Nation has regional styles. Our reservation is really large, and we're a really large tribe. So we have a lot of distinct regional styles in our textile work. So just to talk about what a Navajo textile is, it is typically, historically, before the introduction of commercial yarn and fiber. It was all hand spun wool, and all of the women across the reservation had very distinct styles, and obviously handprints in their weaving. And so, a Navajo textile is woven on a vertical loom, so it's upright, and you're facing that loom. Um, it just was funny. I would talk about Navajo weaving, and people wouldn't really understand or like know the mechanics of it. So yeah, done on a vertical loom, hand spun wool fibers. Sheep are really important and significant in Navajo, lifestyle and life ways. So um, yeah, it's just a really beautiful, beautiful practice. So the Shiprock area is known for pictorial weavings, or like weavings that depict an image in some, so there's some sort of like direct visual communication. I also think on the Northern Navajo Nation, there's like a wedge weave style, which is, weaving on that vertical loom, but sort of in this wedge technique that sort of gives it a different warp, a little bit of a different shape. But anyway, that's just getting a bit technical. So I come from a family, a matriline of pictorial weavers, and I actually tend to lean more into what we call a warp faced or a sash belt weave, which is to say that you're weaving your pattern with the warp so that it sort of is a flop of the classic vertical weft. I don't know if that's making sense. So the design is done on the warp instead of like across the wefts. I suppose I don't know if that's getting too technical. But anyway, all that is to say, I came to Aotearoa as I would say as an auntie first and as a weaver second, but I consider those both equal in terms of importance. Well, I would consider maybe auntie a little more important, but anyway, yeah, those are the two things that I came, to Aotearoa as. That is what I consider myself to be, as an auntie and a weaver. So it was really special. I through the Fulbright program actually, and I have to give credit to another Fulbright scholar that was in my award year who was a big fan of Hinakura Smith and her writings on Fatu and, weaving as pedagogy and sort of, yeah, Hinakura Smith has really beautiful writing and research. And so this young woman in the Fulbright cohort said, "Oh my goodness, Hinakura Smith hears, and she's here, and I'm a huge fan," And so we both went up to her, and then we ended up getting invited to their monthly wananga, their monthly Fatu wananga, with Faya Hinakura Smith and Fire Kim Penatito. I hope I'm saying her name right, but they were both so wonderful for me to meet. I met Hinakura maybe like 5 months into, maybe 4 or 5 months into the Fulbright experience. And at that point, I was like, I didn't bring a loom or anything to weave with. So it was really incredible to be invited to a monthly wananga where the focus is weaving, and to learn about how to keke and to go through the process from plant to fiber. And there were a lot of parallels. There was just a lot of really beautiful reflections of home, and it was a welcome feeling of familiarity for me, because you start to get homesick at about that time. And so it was just wonderful to see, right? It's such a different fiber. You're working with a plant instead of, wool from a sheep. And somehow we managed to process them in, to me, similar ways. And so it just is interesting, there was a lot of overlap I saw, even though I was in a very new context, in a different context, but, similar morals, similar worldviews around creation and adornment and collaboration with the environment around you. So it just was so wonderful. Yeah. And I feel so grateful to Kim and Hinakura for welcoming me and the others. There was another Danette, another young Navajo woman in my Fulbright cohort, as well as another Paiute young woman who was doing language revitalization. And we were all at Fatu Wanaga together every month with Hinakura and Kim. And so it just was really meaningful. And you don't recognize how much you look for home until you step outside of home, and then all you're searching for is something that makes you feel that way. So yeah.
Well, I'm just really how cool to hear that you had that. What a beautiful opportunity, and I am rapt because I do know you and your passion for
Mm.
um,
for weaving and textile, and just that, yeah, I can tell through your understanding of the material difference,
Mm,
and understanding but still the love and the care and the culture and the conversations and the same whakaaro
mm,
belief systems, yeah, are there, and
mm,
you start with that. So how very, very, very cool. You
mm,
kind of answered I had a couple of questions lined up for you there, but
mm,
you did answer
totally.
it all in a bit of a hit. Um, were there any moments that particularly resonated with you when you were sitting with um, at the Wananga? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think every time was special. Like it was emotional every time. And I think that's just because you like have this space that you set apart and you're with, for the most part, I mean, there were some men representing, but for the most part, we were with women and their daughters. And so it just was really beautiful to sit in this space with, wahine who are like laughing and then we're crying and then we're laughing again. And then, like just really beautiful, like we're laughing and we're crying at the same time. But I think it just was like, of course, outside of, my table with the indigenous North America representation, it was Te Reo Maori, the whole weekend. Everyone was speaking in their indigenous language, and it was really beautiful. And I think I personally, it's so hard to learn your language and to be an adult and to be humble and say like, actually, I don't know my language, or actually I am like, it's very humbling and very, it's you have to be willing to be like uncomfortable with the fact that you don't know things when you're learning a language or reclaiming a language. And I think that I mean, that was the most poignant thing because it just like it inspired me, it humbled me, it like all of the things, because I have a complicated relationship with my, with Diné Bizad or Navajo language, because it's really challenging to learn. And like you can be embarrassed, even when I was growing up, when I was at a time where that would have been maybe the best the best way to learn it. Even then I felt silly because I couldn't, if you don't have those tongue movements, or like if you don't start doing that language really early, it feels funny. Like it feels funny in your own mouth to try to get those sounds and to do those things, at least for me. And when I was younger, I just would feel so ashamed that like I couldn't speak my language, or that I sounded funny, or I sounded, like a white girl, which is it happens. But
Does your mum speak your language?
yeah, yeah, my mom is fluent, and my whole family speaks the language. But I grew up 8 hours north of my reservation. I grew up in northern Utah, just outside of Ogden, actually just south of Brigham City Indian School, where my grandparents met when they were sent to residential school. And because I mean, I was 8 hours north, my dad is not Navajo. So, but I mean, honestly, I think he might know more Navajo than me. But like, we were just so far north that, summer visits weren't quite enough for me to hold on to the language as much as I wanted to. And I think it just was, it's hard to be a Native woman because there's a lot of work to do. And I think, language on top of all of the other things that we have to do, it's, you have to like really make time and space for it to make it happen. So I think that there's a lot of, and also, it wasn't always fashionable to speak your native language. As we all know, like grandparents went through it when they spoke their language. When my mom was in school, I think there were certain sort of connotations if you spoke Navajo, like, like it just is, you're dealing with all kinds of like perceptions and thoughts from everyone around you. And it's kind of interesting to see how that shapes how you engage with language. Like, but anyway, all that is to say, I have a clunky relationship with my native language. And so, um, it just was it was that was probably one of the most influential things every time, was that I felt really emotional, and I also felt relieved, like actually there is no shame. There's no shame in starting now. There's no shame in saying things wrong or like mixing up my, like, I think it was a really important time for me to say, oh, like, I actually have no shame, like, and I can learn this language. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of it has to do with me getting older because I'm like, I mean, I think the pressures that we feel when we're young, like as teens and young adults, thank goodness I feel a little relief there in terms of I don't know what it is, but I feel like I'm grateful that I'm starting to let go of some of those insecurities. But I think it's, like it's really, and it's so hard and all of the things. And I think because I'm doing work in Indigenous art and like caring for, Indigenous made works and, whether I was in Aotearoa or here at the Indian Arts Research Center, like, I also feel like there's a responsibility, like to do, I feel like I'm constantly on the edge of like having healthy, sort of criticism and awareness of myself and also having some grace for myself. I think it's a fine balance. And I do but I just want to say I do recognize the responsibility as a caretaker, to honor my language and to do what I can to learn it and learn my ceremonies and things like that. Like it's so important it just is so important for our lives, but also for caring for, some of these really significant quote material culture items. I don't love that phrase, but it's just really important to be tapped in and to be aware of myself in that way. So I'm so grateful that hasn't released my own personal, like, I do want to get better and I'm like excited to get better in my language, like.
So whereabouts are you based now? Are you doing another?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm doing a 1 year internship. So my internship wraps up at the end of May of 2025. All that is to say, it's a museum collections internship and really exciting to see that this kind of collaboration is possible. And yeah, very reassuring that like this is a practice because I think when I was in Auckland, I was just so blown away by Auckland War Memorial Museum and Te Aho Motunga Kore, their collaborative textile space. And it just was mind blowing to me how it just seemed so accessible, right? Because the museum, I think before all of my learning and this journey, it is a very exclusive space. You don't see what's behind the curtain in the back, like, and so I think that made a huge impression on me at Auckland Museum, and that's also why I loved working with the staff. Like I adore Andrea Lowe. She took such good care of me at the museum. Ann Tozer was the collections manager at the time. And she was wondering, like, there was never a question, right? Like, they came to me and said, we want you to have access. And then, like, it just sort of blossomed from there. And I didn't really experience that kind of care really in the US. And so now it's just really wonderful to be here at this collaborative research center because I feel like I was welcomed and I was collaborated with so much at Auckland Museum. I'm trying to think of other, Jimmy Maiei took really good care of the relatives that he was pulling. Like there was just so many collaborators and I was working with just the most wonderful, Indigenous Māori Pacifica, individuals who just like made my time such a blast at the museum. So it just feels really special that I can now be in that position here in my own homeland, to be that connector. So I think about everyone in Tamaki all the time. I'm always thinking of them.
Were there issues here that reminded you of challenges faced at home? And are there other terms? I'm not going to say the C word, but are there other terms or terminology used in your communities around the C word I won't use?
Totally, totally. Well, I think obviously, there's like over 500 languages represented in Indigenous North America, but we all have a term, for for Anglo settlers that have come into the space, who have entered the chat, we have terms. And so I think it's kind of funny, though. It's funny. I feel like my friends and I, and this might be Indian humor, indigenous humor, but like we will use, we'll use each other's words when referencing sort of,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, sort of that settler nonsense. So like my good friend is Oto, and yeah. So I'll like use her term, and sometimes she'll throw out, right, because Navajo we call Anglo settlers Bilagana. I think it's like Anglo outsiders, sort of a term to reference this like other who has like entered into the space is Bilagana. But that's also, it's not necessarily derogatory because that's my second, that's my father's clan. That's like how we would identify him clan wise. So it's not necessarily derogatory, but I think that's what makes language fun is like the context that you use it in.
Yes.
And so it just is funny, we use humor, like I'll throw in, I don't know if you've seen Dances with Wolves. It's an iconic
Oh,
American
yes.
Western film. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Love my man. Oh, what's his name? Kevin Costner.
Kevin.
Love him.
Yes, I
But
I'd love to see your thoughts on this film, actually. I did see that film in the 90s
oh
at
yeah.
movies, but respectfully to you, and this is about your
Mm,
community and your
yeah.
people. So, yes, your take on that film.
Yeah. So yeah, anyway, there's a funny scene in that one where this woman who she's a white woman and she's been adopted into the tribe, like the tribe took her in and took care of her, I guess, from her youth. It's been a long time since I watched it. But anyway, it's funny. The punchline is this woman sees Kevin Costner, who is an army soldier. I forget for who, if he was for the Confederacy or for the North. But anyway, she like runs away, like yelling "Wasichu," and so that's one of that's just like a funny term that we'll just like sprinkle into things, and I think it means the same. This white person Wasichu.
Was it too?
Um, I think actually it might mean like, ooh, I think the term, I could be very wrong, so we can check this and remove it. But I think that term was assigned because um, it is like associated with like greed. Like I think the first time it was coined was because um, I think the visiting like settler men were like eating too much or like helping themselves a little too much at this end. So like yeah, I think that's how Wasichu came to the mix, but I might be very wrong. I felt like it means like yeah. There's no problem there. But I think just in general, I think I mean there are very similar issues, right? Incarceration of Indigenous people. I think those feelings hit close to home. I think just like interesting. It's just interesting overlaps when you're an Indigenous person, and also like that sort of the racism that's so intimately inter of another, but now I've lost it. Even resident, even the experiences of our grandparents, right? Like there wasn't necessarily the boarding school in the same way in Aotearoa, but I do think there's so much similarity in how those assimilation projects were done. And I think also that timeline of the colonial project is interesting, right? Because by the time everyone got to the Pacific, they had already tested things out in different different countries like North America, or what is now called North America or the Americas. So it's just like interesting because I feel like that creates new context for this colonial project. But it just sort of, it's interesting to see like that. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, another question. Were there any moments or conversations that made you feel deeply connected to Māori artists, especially around shared histories of resilience?
Yeah, I think the shared moments, and again, and this I am a number one fan of women around the world, and so I'm going to be. I think all of my really big moments of just like deep emotion, it was always around womanhood and like how I was sort of understanding myself and the wahine around me and just what it means to be an Indigenous woman. And so I think through that, I think it's any kind of deeply embodied practice, such as fatu, such as weaving, right? It just, there were such clear parallels that were reassuring for me. And like, let me know that I was like on the right path. I think being in community with so many wonderful women who are creating, right? It doesn't necessarily, this doesn't have to do with fatu specifically, but like just women who are creating for their family and, you know, in whatever medium that is, whether it was writing or weaving or, you know, painting. It was just like magical to be with women that you know are doing it for their family and just like the entire process that becomes embodied in the artwork or in the product or whatever it is. Just it was really meaningful to be in the process with other women and like to sort of absorb that energy and like have that manifest in what we were creating or, you know, what we're writing or what we're doing. I will say I also, you know, Hinekura kind of spontaneously, it was like the second to last weekend I was in Aotearoa and I was in the thick of it with my thesis. And she was like, do you want to come to this wananga that we're having at, she invited me to it just sort of as it was a spontaneous invitation. And she's currently working on a book that she's writing, because her PhD was about reconnecting wahine with their fatu practice. So it was about reconnecting as grown women and, you know, reconnecting with this practice that, you know, everyone, those before us have done and have embodied, whether or not we've done it ourselves. I think it's inside of us. So anyway, I was invited to that and I was just like really struggling with my thesis. And I just felt like, you know, I felt such an obligation to do justice to the relatives I was working with at Auckland Museum. I should say my thesis was about 19th century beadwork from North America housed at Auckland War Memorial. And my thesis was sort of researching and offering a narrative for these, you know, these relatives who have been on a long-term holiday away from home. And anyway, I just was feeling really not proud. Like I was feeling not proud of it. And I just felt like, you know, like they deserve so much more than what I was giving them in terms of my writing and in terms of, you know, I just felt like I was not doing justice to, you know, to my relatives that are in that museum. And so I just really like, it was weighing on me. And then Hinekura had invited me to this wananga and I went and I just like, you know, everyone's working on their projects. And I was like, I hope you're okay if I just write because I really need to finish this, this like really big assignment. Yeah. And it was wonderful. I read a small introduction and I just like the conversation and the support. And I just was so overwhelmed emotionally. Like I just remember crying because I just was so sure that it was terrible. I was like, this is so bad. I'm not, you know, I'm not giving this beadwork like nearly as much as it deserves in terms of my right. You know, you feel so much pressure to do a really good job for your family, for, you know, your ancestors, for the helpful, you know, Auckland War Memorial team that have been supporting you. So I just felt so much, you know, that I just like wanted it to be so good. And it can like, it also hinders me when I think like that, you know, because you don't, it's like makes it almost too hard to approach. But that was like really, that was just like a very significant moment. And I think I was also coming to terms with the fact that I was about to leave and I was saying goodbye to these women that I had, you know, joined in Wananga for a year. And then I just suddenly had to say, oh, you're not, you know, you're not going to see me next month. So it just was emotional all around. But I think that was a significant emotional moment for me. And I guess I haven't really put any of this into words. So you're really getting, you're getting all of this, you know, fresh out of the vault.
Well, thank you so much. Hearing you share that with me, I'm curious to know Um, did you feel connected to our karakia and our waiata that I'm sure you would have had during your wānanga? For me, when I am overcome with emotion um, when I hear certain karakia and waiata, of course, in different contexts and different situations. But I just wanted to know too, had you had an opportunity to, yeah, learn karakia and learn waiata, and with you feeling this way that weekend, I hope you just let it out too while you were with them, and just being surrounded with them, knowing you were in a safe space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the karakia, yeah. I think it was all so beautiful, and I am very privileged, and I feel very blessed that I have been to Aotearoa several times. So the first time I came was in 2018 um, with my undergraduate student group. So Dartmouth, I graduated from Dartmouth College in 2019. And in 2018, during my junior year, they do, Dartmouth has a lot of study abroad programs. And for I was doing anthropology and Native American studies. And so, Aotearoa is the foreign study program for that, for anthropology. So I came in 2018, and Bianca Ranson on Waiheke Island. I don't know if you have met her, but she operates Potiki Adventures, and she helps take care for, yeah, she helps care for Piritahi Marae with Whaia Maikara and others, and also yeah, sorry, if I start listing names, I'm gonna be listing them a lot. But Bianca, her sisters, I also wonderful. But anyway, I had a privilege of really learning actually quite a bit of one Waiata in 2018 while I was here, and it was really actually beautiful. And I think that going back to language, I think when I enjoyed singing, when I enjoyed Waiata so much, I was like, it just was like a moment where I was like, oh, I can do this in Navajo. I can do this in my own language. Like, and I think that was one of the first time the seed was planted of like, oh, I can sing I can sing in my own language. It's just like, because it doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't always, I forget what's possible when when you get stuck in routine and what you need to do as a student, as a mom, you get caught in these sort of roles. And I do get tunnel vision, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can like practice my own songs. I can sing my own, and like there's those songs that everyone knows, that are in ceremonies, so those songs. But I was like, in general, I can learn a lot more. But I do think I was really fortunate to learn the Waiata, to learn the movement, with the songs in 2018. And they stuck really well. So then when I came back in 2019 for NASA, Native American Indigenous Studies Association, it was like I hadn't left. And then I was expecting to come right back, but the pandemic hit, and my Fulbright was postponed for a full year before I could come out. And so what all of that is to say, singing made an immediate impression on me. The first pofari I went through, like as soon as I heard, the wahine calling, it is emotional. Like you hear emotion. It's, you hear, to me, it was like one of the most beautiful things, like it's gorgeous. There's so much alive in that projection. Like there's so much energy in that, and it just is overwhelming and beautiful. And I think that no matter where I was, if I was with the kiddos singing, Waiata, the alphabet song, if I was singing that in Te Wharikura, which is where I worked at a cultural center, on Te Waitamata, right there by Waiheke Ferry Terminal. It was the same feeling with the little kids as it was, the first time I heard, a woman calling in Pofari. So it's exciting because that feeling never goes away for me. And the same for Karakia, I think. And I'm also so grateful that my Chireo built a bit, coming back and forth. It's like exciting when you're sitting in Pofari and you kind of have an idea of what people, of what's going on, like that was an exciting milestone of mine as well. And I think prayer, it was always a time for me to pray as well. And so I think I think I'm praying and I'm asking for the same things for myself. And it just was a moment of mutual sort of emotion. And yeah, just, I think, yeah, I think it was all touching and very special for me because I am, I am an outsider. Like I'm not from Aotearoa. And so to be embraced, even just that like makes me tearful. Like to, that I was so lucky to experience and to be embraced in the ways that I was. It's really special and coming from my context, it's so unique, we don't just welcome people like that, and for a lot of good reasons, a lot of good safety, security reasons, like some tribes out here tend to be more guarded in how we welcome and which is very real and very valid. But to me, that just lets me know how special it is that I, could be embraced and that I was welcomed and like I was welcomed back. And again, like I think the other thing, and this might sound silly, but I think I was always relieved when people were happy to see me. Like like I was like, oh my, you remember me and you are happy to see me here. And it just feels like that's not something that has been lost on me, like that it's really meaningful to me.
That leads me into asking you, how do you think Indigenous cultures across the globe could support each other in preserving their traditions?
Totally. I think it's an exciting time, It's always a good day to be Indigenous. I think it's a really exciting time now and I think it's also a really challenging time. So, but I think, my friend, my good friend who was here on her Fulbright, she's a Paiute scholar and she's working on Paiute language revitalization in her home community in Nevada. And so she came here and, really got immersed in the Kahongoreo or sorry, she came to Aotearoa. I'm talking like I'm still there. And, was working in Kahongoreo, she identified a model that she could take home and, sort of work on that language nest project from the ground up. And I think, I think there's so much to learn because it's just like, it's so interesting. I'm always thinking about this. um, but the US is so large, in terms of just like square, what is that, kilo squared is square kilometers and square miles. It's so large. And so I think that's not to say that things aren't translatable from Aotearoa. I think actually looking at Kahongoreo and other sort of revitalization efforts, whether it's in art, language, or, whatever our practice or our medium, I think there's so much that can be translated on the local level back to the States, despite the fact that the States are huge. We have a weird government system set up, just like bizarre, state and federal, and so many different, who's in charge kind of things. But that being said, I think I think we can still figure out how to adapt and to exchange, like I think there's definitely opportunity to exchange. And I think the first place I really saw that was the Kahongoreo, and language nest projects. But I think I really, what's another example? I'm really like inspired by what I see in just like political involvement in Aotearoa. And, you can like, again, it's such a small context in Aotearoa that the mobilization is different. And also it's like exciting because it's like, oh, okay, so if we, the states are huge, but like we can mobilize similarly, or like, it just is like, it's just a different way of figuring out the how, but there is, we can learn a lot and we can exchange a lot. And I think like, I'm trying to remember the number. It was like Māori Studies 10 something. Oh, is that right? Or maybe it was with Professor Teopira, Introduction to the Māori Universe. But he talked a lot about like the civil rights movement in the States and, the impact that had in the Pacific and in Tamaki and Aotearoa. So like, I just think that there's so much to translate and like there's so much to learn, right? Like I don't think that the distance between us is a factor. Like I think it's exciting how much has been learned and how much we can. This is so funny. Well, I think also just in terms of like Indigenous studies, I think that's exciting. I feel like I'm seeing more of a global Indigenous approach just in my reading and in what's being published now. So that's exciting to see sort of that global Indigenous exchange just in academic writing. That's not to say that that's like the only space for that kind of exchange. But I also think, right, like what is really beautiful to me is that we've actually been exchanging for a long time, I think. I think we've been having this exchange and like, yeah, this sort of Indigenous solidarity from across the globe. Um, I think, I bump into people all the time, actually, a lot of, Indigenous artists and scholars out here, and everyone in some capacity has voyaged to Aotearoa, right? They've gone out for like an artist exchange, right? I know a lot of Dene weavers who have gone out to Aotearoa and done that weaving exchange. And like these, this is in the 90s, this is in the 80s, right? Like I feel like these relationships have been happening, you know, of Christina, oh my gosh, Wirihana? Christina Fayatina? Tina Whitty, she's been doing all kinds of really beautiful art projects with First Nations communities for a very long time too. So it's also exciting for me to see this like longer line of this like known relationship, right? Like maybe we don't know each other yet, but like I know my descendants are still going to be traveling to Aotearoa in the same way I know that, your descendants are going to be connecting with mine, like it's just exciting to know that we've been connected. And actually, I would say even pre-contact, I know we were connected. Even pre-colonial ships going where they were going. I know that there was a connection for us, in what is called the Americas and with our relatives in the Pacific, or what is now known as the Pacific. So, anyway, I guess that's all I want to say there. But I do think it's exciting, like museum practices, like how I mentioned Auckland War Memorial, and just like this sort of keenness to collaborate that I'm excited to see how to make that happen more regularly out here.
Can I ask you, what has your mum or your parents, your aunties, cousins, what do they think about your travels and your knowledge that you've acquired and that exchange that we've just discussed? What is their
Yeah.
take on all of this?
Yeah. I hope they're excited. I know they're proud and I know I know they are, but I think what I forget about is um oh, there's so much to this question. I was the first person in my family, to pursue a college education and undergraduate education. I remember when I was little, maybe I was 5, um, and my dad went back to a local technical college to get his GED, and I believe his associates at the time. And that was when I was just a little kid. But I remember my mom, right? My dad had to live close to the technical college. It was like a state away. So I remember like seeing my dad go through his graduation ceremony when I was really little. And I actually was like reflecting on it a lot recently because I feel like you live your life and you forget the connections along the way. But all that is to say, I'm the first person to like pursue an undergraduate bachelor's education. Um, and in New Hampshire at Dartmouth College, no less. So that was like a huge learning curve for all of us because, it was an Ivy League school. I went to a public school in northern Utah, and it just, there was just so much that I just had no idea about, like financial aid, all of these logistical things about going away to school that we all just kind of stumbled through. And I'd say that held true for the second time around with my master's. We were all again figuring out what it means. I secured the funding and then I had to sort of figure everything out from there. So that's great. I'm very grateful to have had that Fulbright award and to have my education covered for that. But anyway, it was very new for all of us, and I think in the midst of all of that, I forget that it's exciting for everyone involved. So anyway, I know my parents, my mom visited me when I was in Aotearoa in November. Oh, was it November of last year, actually? Oh, close to her birthday. Yeah. So it was November of last year. And it was the first time my mom had traveled overseas. She had never done an international flight. She had never. And in fact, when my parents first got together, my dad had something. He's from Pennsylvania. My mom's from New Mexico, and they were in Utah, but they needed to fly to Pennsylvania for something. And my mom had never been on a plane, and she was, it's like really scary if you've never been on one. Yeah. So, but I suppose what I'm saying is no one in my family has ever traveled this way. No one has gone to school this way. And it was new for all of us. And I'm always in the thick of it. So I forget that it's actually really meaningful for my parents and now I might get emotional, but like, it's, my auntie, like my family's really proud, and it is overwhelming because I forget to be proud of myself. But I also think one time that it was really clear that like it really matters is we have a woman's rite of passage ceremony, kinanta, and a young woman goes through that when she gets her first cycle, and it's a really significant 4-day puberty ceremony, and the young woman, it's a tough 4 days, and she selects an older woman in her community who she would like to be molded in the image of. And like, so usually, people will ask their grandma, their mom, their auntie. It's whoever the young woman, identifies as her mentor, who she wants to mentor her. And this was this was right before I came to Aotearoa, so 2022. My cousin, let's see, I think she's in the 7th grade. She's in junior high. She asked me, she picked me and asked me if I would mold her and if I would be her mentor through the ceremony process. And I think that was like it was emotional for a lot of reasons, but I think that was like one of the first times I was like, oh, so people like are like watching and they like care what I'm up to. I think it was just like a really big moment of, my cousin saying like, I'm going to go to Dartmouth. I'm going to do this. I'm going to, like, and I just felt like, again, such responsibility, like, oh my gosh, well, I better be a good role model. And also just, it was really a moment where I realized that people cared about what, that my family really cares, and not just cares, like they are just as invested as I am. And yeah, it just like, if I get too into detail, I'm going to cry. So I'm trying not to, but it means a lot to me, that it means so much to them, I guess. Like, yeah.
Because what a special thing for your mum to come down and celebrate her daughter.
Yeah. Oh, she loved it. She loved it. She's very, I think I might be returning maybe for the graduation ceremony in May. And she was, I guess, is that a diploma? But like, I just was kind of teetering on like, but my family is, this is exciting, not just for me, but for my family. So yeah, we're hoping that we make it in May. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex, for joining us on this week's episode. And to our listeners, we appreciate your support. Catch you all on the next episode of What's in Your Kete. Mā te wā.